Now, I think we should move now to our last session for today. And this is a session devoted to multi-regional, multi-state projections. I think that this topic is very close to the heart of YASA and Wolfgang, of course, because that was something which was, initiated to a large extent at YASA by works of André Rogers, Franz Willeke, Phillips, who was also visiting YASA, and many other native teachers, and this work is still being continued at YASA. So we have 4 presentations, and the first presenter is James Raymer. Yes, and he's going to talk about multi-regional projections of Australian indigenous populations with identification status change. The floor is yours.
Okay. Well, before I talk about the presentation, I'd like to say a few words. I'm very pleased and honored to be here to celebrate the many achievements. There have been wonderful achievements of Wolfgang Lutz. And I don't know if you remember, but I'm also very appreciative, not only his books and papers and ideas, which have helped guide my research thinking over the years, but also how my interactions with you at YASA changed my research and life courses forever. It was in 2002, I applied to be a young summer scientist at YASA, and I was accepted. And two very important things happened. First, I was matched up with Warren Sanderson, who suggested I look into European migration. And I was a bit lost. I was just starting my PhD and looking for applications to model migration. And that's led to many papers, some really exciting research projects modeling European migration, and the credit goes to me being offered a professorship at A&U. The second thing is I met my wife at YASA. And I'm happy to report we're still very happily married, and we have 3 beautiful daughters, ages 10, 4, and 6. So I have that to thank you for, getting that opportunity. Over the years, I've also been watching and looking at what's happening in Vienna. I've been extremely impressed by Wolfgang's energy and enthusiasm for demography. Not only is Vienna a top recruiter of the best young minds and best young demographers, but it has also helped make Europe the place where the most innovative research is happening. So Wolfgang, thank you for all your hard work and leadership, and again, I'm very excited to be here, and I hope you enjoy this presentation. Okay, so to talk about, this will be a little bit of a distraction, because it's not only it's outside Europe, but when I was asked to give a talk on multi-regional projections, and this was some time ago, and I was thinking, well, what could I add that's new that we haven't done? And also something that I was involved in. And I've been, since arriving in Australia, I've been involved in a project trying to improve projections of the indigenous population in Australia. And the indigenous population is a very important population. It has a history and culture that goes back 40,000 years. But it's also a very small and extremely disadvantaged population. Okay? It's only about 3% of the total population. And it's spread across a vast space. And so actually trying to understand this demographic change is challenging, let alone trying to project it. And so I want to introduce this idea, and I want to show how multi-regional, multi-state, I use the two interchangeably. This is actually a combination of, I'm including both migration and a status change, so it's actually 2 transitions together. And I want to show how these techniques that were developed or greatly enhanced at YASA, and by many people who have done multi-state methods, how these pretty basic methods can help our understanding of demographic change. Okay. Just to begin, though, I think we should have some definitions, and these are Franz Willike's definitions, which I always like. So, multi-state demography is the study of populations stratified by age, sex, and one or several attributes. And these things can be applied to anything. It could be region of residence, and that's traditionally multi-regional demography, so we're interested in people who change their reason of residence. It could be marital status, education, number of children, household, and so on. Okay, population that is stratified is a multi-state population. And people who occupy the same state constitute a subpopulation. So we're interested in modeling subpopulations simultaneously. The dynamics of multi-state populations are governed by the normal demographic things of fertility, mortality, and the transfers between these populations. So that's just to put everybody on the same place. I assume everybody here knows multi-state demography, but I thought I better be careful. Okay, so let me talk about this particular application. So Australia it's actually more formally the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Island population, but it's generally called the indigenous population. It has been growing very rapidly since it was first measured for the whole of Australia in 1971. Before that, it wasn't measured. And it's been growing at a rate of about 4% a year, or over 5 years. So I'm going to be careful there. And the reasons for this growth are high fertility rates, relatively large population in childbearing years, high mixed partnering rates in urban areas that results in additional children being identified as indigenous, identification change, and better enumeration by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Now the first two and the last one we're pretty comfortable with. We've been working with that forever. The red ones, the high mixed partnering rates and identification change, those are more difficult. And how do you build those into a projection model or into a demographic analysis? And I'm going to focus on, I'm not going to really touch on the mixed partnering rates, but I'm going to focus on identification change. And further, this is at the national level, I'm going to take a subnational approach. So introduce internal migration. Okay, so the aims are, first, I just want to understand the importance and also the relationships of identification change and migration for the indigenous population in Australia. And second is to develop a projection tool that can show the effects of both factors in relation to other sources of population change, namely natural increase. So let's get started. The data is primarily from census data, which is really the only data source capable of measuring such a small population. It's only about 3%. So from the census data, we can get indigenous status of the population. We can get migration data. And I'll talk about, I'm not going to use a standard geography, I'm going to use area groups. But we can get the 5-year ago question, we can get age, we can get sex. Identification change, we've only recently been able to study this by linkage between the past two censuses. So they've taken a sample of the 2011 and 2006 census. So in Australia, they do censuses every 5 years. And here we get some really interesting information. We can have the place of residence and indigenous status in 2011 by the place of residence and indigenous status in 2006. And that's really going to be the focus. That's our transitions. The big problem, though, is census data here is high quality. This is a sample, and when you get down to a small problem, a small population in a sample, you have small set of problems. So we have to do some modeling. I won't talk about that. We can basically borrow the strength from the census and use the longitudinal data set to fill in the missing parts. Okay, so here's the geography I'm using. I'm going to use these area groups. So we have 3 areas of interest. First is major cities, which you probably can't see in the back. These are these tiny little blue areas. Okay, up there. And then we have regional Australia, which is the yellow, and remote Australia, which is the green. And I'm interested in, really want to know how is it, and the indigenous population is disproportionately larger in remote Australia. And I want to understand, are they moving to major cities in regional Australia, and how are those dynamics affecting identification change? Okay, for multi-state methods, everything is driven by these transition matrices. And so what I'm really doing is I have 6 populations, okay? And I'm allowing people to move between these 6 populations. And so it's indigenous in major cities, regional areas, remote areas. And then you have the non-indigenous, which is the majority population, major cities, regional areas, remote areas. And we have their status in 2006, by their status in 2011, and we're interested in the movements across that. And let me just walk you through this. The diagonal are those people who don't change their status. They remain both in the area type of residence and they retain their identity. The blue cells are those people who don't change their identification but make a migration. Okay? So these people remain indigenous between 2006 and 2011, but move. The same thing down here. These are non-indigenous. And these type of tables are what's normally used in multi-regional projection. Okay? Then we have these green cells. Those are people who don't move but change their identification. In both cases. So those are non-indigenous who become indigenous, and indigenous who become non-indigenous. And lastly, the red cells are people who both make a migration and change their identification. Okay? Try to keep these pictures in mind, because I'll come back and I'm going to show some numbers and things, but basically the upper left quadrant are those people who remain indigenous, but move.
May I ask you a question? What is indigenous? Is this that is aboriginal?
Yes, Aboriginal.
Why can you change from aborigines to non-aboriginal?
Because there's this Torres Strait Islander population, so technically indigenous combines both. So it's the term, it's a more general term. But Aboriginal is an indigenous population.
But I don't understand. If he is or she is Aborigine, she has to stay Aborigine. If this is a black man,
it could be self-reported.
Oh yeah, sorry. These are self-reports
These are
from a
These are
census.
self-reported. So you could report yourself as Aboriginal in one census and then not in the other census.
And there's also, and when you have a child, there's a lot of mixed parenting. And they have children. And one could be non-indigenous and one could be indigenous. What is the child? Yeah, it's a self-report. That's an important point. Thank you. So these are all self-reports, and you can change your self-report depending on your life circumstances. Any other clarifications? Please feel free to stop. Okay, so here's what the numbers look like. Okay? And I'll walk you through it slowly, so don't worry. I know it's a lot of numbers. But it's basically a cross-tabulation of that diagram I just showed you. So you have the indigenous in 2006, non-indigenous, and these are their statuses in 2011. A couple things you see. Overall, the census population was 17,240,000. These are people over the age of 5, okay? And they had to have been alive 5 years ago, right? Okay? And so if you go down the columns, you get the 2011 populations. If you go across the rows, you get the distributions in 2006. And one thing you should see was a couple things. One is that this is a much bigger population. Most people are living in major cities. Those small blue dots I showed you, so 11.8 million of the 17 million. What else? Indigenous population is much smaller. There's spread more. Actually, there's more in the regional areas of Australia. The other thing is the diagonal elements, so here and here, are also larger. So most people are not changing identification. But they're. So let's take one example. Walk through. So this is, if we look at the indigenous population of 2011 who lived in major cities, okay, there were 149,000. This grew from 137,000 in 2006. Okay? What caused this growth? Well, this is the people who retained their status. So 114,000 remained indigenous and in major cities. 8,200 went to regional areas, 1,000 went to remote areas, 13,000 changed their identification to non-indigenous, 640 changed their identification and moved to regional areas, and 119 changed their identification to non-indigenous and moved to remote areas. Okay? And then these would be the inflows. So you have the outflows and you have the inflows. And in this case, major cities grew in every single exchange. So it was a net gain. If we take the non-indigenous example, so this is a non-indigenous population living in major cities in 2011, we got an opposite story. So actually the population in 2011 was smaller than 2006. Okay, so it's 11.8 million versus 11.763. And here the exchanges were almost all negative. I think there's one example where it's a positive one. So that gives you a sense of the transitions that are happening. We can use this information also to do some calculations. So I was interested in, part of this was trying to understand what's driving identification change, and is migration an important factor to that. So I can calculate relative ratios, relative risks of basically the odds of persons moving and changing their identification to just those, the odds of those just changing their identification but not migrating. And there's some really interesting findings, although the numbers underlying these are pretty small, but some of these effects are quite strong. So if you're indigenous, living in a remote area of Australia in 2006, and you move to a major city, you're 7 times more likely to change your identification, all things being equal. Okay? If you're non-indigenous living in a remote in Australia, and you move to a major city, it's the opposite. You're more likely to retain your identification. That's interesting. You see some of these are very low. So migration can work, in this case, seems to work in both ways. I don't have standard errors on these, so I guess I don't know how much to trust these. But it appears that it can work well. In some types of moves, you're more likely to retain your identification. In other types of moves, you may be more likely to change your identification, depending on what social context you're moving into. Okay. So I wanted to put this information into a multi-regional population projection. And as I hope you know, this is an extension of the cohort component model. Subpopulations are allowed to move between these various states in the life course. All of the transitions, I showed you the counts, but they've been converted into probabilities, and they're associated with the correct populations at risk. And I'm going to focus on projecting those 6 populations, and everything that's going to be by age, sex, for those 6 populations. And every population has its own fertility, mortality, internal migration, and identification change. We also, for the non-indigenous population, international migration is a very important component of growth, so we included that too. And because I'm not interested in accuracy, I just wanted to see what the effects were. And so we're projecting 20 years, or four jumps into the future. We're just going to keep the rates fixed though, because I don't have any better data. But it's a what if question.
How did you compute the rates?
We have the populations. It's complicated. There's a whole modeling, but we took those census data and that longitudinal data. We used log linear models to combine the two, so to get some strength, and we had to introduce some smoothing, especially for the transition rates. But we had estimated resident populations at risk.
Because of probabilities, how did you compute the rates?
Oh, sorry, probabilities.
Okay.
That was a misstep. Okay, so let me just show you what some of these profiles look like. So this is that upper left quadrant I showed you. These are the indigenous population who remain indigenous, but either stay in the diagonal or make a migration. And one thing that's interesting is even the internal migration patterns are very different. I've looked into these. They have different drivers, it appears, than internal migration of the majority population. But otherwise, it's pretty standard. It's different scales, so it's just showing the shapes. For the non-indigenous population who become indigenous, so this is that lower left quadrant, the table I showed you by age. These are the estimated age-specific probabilities. And here, I guess what's probably the most striking pattern is identification change happens at a pretty high level when you're young, when you're children. And that's because their parents are picking their identification. Okay. And what else? Okay, in our model, we also allowed both indigenous mothers and non-indigenous mothers to have both indigenous babies and non-indigenous babies. So we have applied these probabilities to the age-specific fertility rates. So you can see that for indigenous, most of the babies are indigenous. In remote areas, all were considered indigenous. For non-indigenous population, of course, most will be non-indigenous. Mortality, I told you it's a disadvantaged population. These three lines, which you may not be able to distinguish in the back, are the non-indigenous mortality rates across the three geographies. This is the indigenous mortality rates. In both cases, those living in remote areas have the highest mortality. Okay, and from the projections, we can do some analysis, we can get some results. So these are just the levels of population change for two projection periods, 2011, 2016, and 2026 to 2031. And what we can see is, well, if we take the recent period, first period, we projected 37,000 growth for major cities, 40,000 for regional areas, about 8,000 for remote areas. In all cases, most of the growth was through the natural increase, which is not surprising. What was interesting, which I didn't expect, is the second component of growth, the second most important component of growth, was identification change for major cities, followed by internal migration, and the same for regional areas. For remote areas, the net loss due to internal migration was much higher. Okay. And this intersection between internal migration and identification change was negligible. So it was an important component of growth. This changed slightly over the projection period, so actually for major cities, identification change became more important as a component of growth. For regional areas, it became less important, and for remote areas, it became relatively more important. Look at the age profiles, not a whole lot of change there. The shaded bars are the 2011 base, and the diagonal, or kind of out the transparent ones, are the projected 2031. Both still are expected to retain a pretty youthful population. I think this is almost to the end. This multi-regional approach produces much different projections than if you didn't include identification change and if you didn't link the populations together, especially for major cities and remote areas, for regional areas. So the solid line is the multi-regional projections. The dashed line would be a uni-regional projection without identification change. Okay. For remote areas, though, it doesn't make a big difference because there's not a whole lot of identification change happening there. So in summary, we find that although natural population increase made it the greatest component of net population change, identification change is an important additional contributor. Interaction between identification change and migration led to small but important projected spatial realignment of the population, especially from major cities and remote areas to regional areas. Well, I hope, and lastly, identification change is driven by a number of factors. And the application, I hope I've convinced you that the application of multi-regional or multi-state methods will provide greater insights into the forces that are driving indigenous population change. This is a funded project. And lastly, so I have a small token present for you, Wolfgang. It's not much, but I hope you will only use it between, say, November and February. It's a pin, and I hope you will think of the nice weather we have in Australia, and maybe come and see us sometime. Thank you very much.
just add here on this sort of micro-demographic introduction to your talk about having met your wife at YASA. You probably know that you're not the only demographer. Actually, I just had a very nice message from George Goldstein from Berkeley, who says he's very sorry he can't come, and then he says a few nice words about my work, but most importantly for his life, probably most the fact that I allowed him to stay 3 months longer at YASA after the summer program, because he had just met his wife, and without these extra months, the relationship wouldn't have stabilized, so he's very happy. And of course, you probably also know that Hans-Peter Kohler met his wife at YASA. She was actually a research assistant at YASA. So there are many prominent demographers where Vienna also served a different micro-demographic function.